Welcome back, Osian Rees today. I had lots of dealings with Osh during his degree course. Hopefully he won't reminisce on too many of the bad memories within his talk today. But just to summarize, he did placements with Arup, DMVGL, and also Belltown Power during the degree. Did stacks of work in relation to renewable energy, a final year project linked to vertical farming. And I did my very best to keep him on to stay and do a PhD, but unfortunately failed miserably. For those of you who are taking the new solar energy course, though, I did manage him to persuade Osh to help me develop that about a year and a half ago. And you'll be pleased to know, Osh, that that's running today actually for the second lecture, and the students will be starting your coursework project very soon. But he managed to escape, and since then he's been working successfully with Bombora Wave Power. And not that I'm biased, but today's talk is bound to be good because it's being given by a Welshman pursuing career interests in renewable energy. So no pressure, Osh. Great to see you again, and thanks a lot for all the support you're still giving to the Eng Des course.
Thank you very much, Paul. What a glowing introduction. Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully, you should all be able to see that now. So yeah, here we go. So my journey to wave energy. Basically, it's going to be quite an informal talk, really. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've ended up where I am now, working for a wave energy startup company in West Wales. I'm going to talk very briefly about kind of a few token slides for the journey that took me to engineering design in Bristol. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiences that I had there, in particular, kind of the work placements that I did, and how those kind of narrowed my thinking towards the career that I wanted to go into, and I guess some sort of tips and tricks and what I've learned along the way from doing that. And then I guess some of my thoughts on renewable energy in general and the opportunities that has, and the kind of exciting prospect for young engineers of the future. Yeah, leave plenty of time at the end for questions. So yeah, I'll zip through this then. Yeah, so as I said, I'll start with a few token slides, just some embarrassing pictures from my childhood, followed by some discussion of the work that I did while I was still a student, and then talk about my current role and what I've been doing for Bombora, and then some more generic slides about wave energy and the opportunities that presents for the future. So here we go. Here we go, the slide with the embarrassing childhood pictures as promised. The time in my life that most like to refer to as pre-beard Osh. Yeah, I grew up in West Wales, in a rural little town called Cardigan. Not really much more to say there. We'll move straight on to the journey to Bristol. I'm sure everybody on the call has gone through the same sort of excitement turning up at Bristol, and all the graffiti that had to offer. And yeah, it's a fantastic place to live. I do miss it a lot. One picture at the bottom there of the engineering design initiation. I'm not sure whether anybody on the call has had the pleasure of going through that, but that's certainly a memorable experience. So jumping straight into it then, the first placement that I did with engineering design, as Paul mentioned, I did my summer placement after year one with Arup, who are kind of quite a well-known civil engineering company. I've got in the title there, this is my expectation. So I was very excited about going to work for Arup. I'd heard about all these incredible projects that they'd worked on, most notably on the right there, the Sydney Opera House is one of their big flagship projects. And then things more recently, like on the left-hand side, the CCTV building in Beijing. And then in the middle, a project that I was particularly inspired by, which is the Aeolus wind instrument that you basically place in the middle of a lake, and as the wind passes through all those tubes, it creates like a whimsical musical experience as you're passing through the lake. So these are the sort of projects that I was looking at before going on my summer placement at Arup. I turned up there on the first day. There were 3 of us from engineering design who were working, had a summer placement with Arup at the time. Alex Mulroy, some of you might know him. They turn to him and they say, "Oh, Alex, you're going to be working on this rotating sculpture that we're going to place in Qatar." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds really cool. I'd love to work on that." And then Charlie Leather, another person you might know, they turn to her and they say, "Charlie, you're going to be working on Abu Dhabi International Airport. It's going to be the largest ever airport in the world. You're going to be working on that." And then they turned to me and I'm like, "Oh my God, what are they going to give me? All these projects sound incredible." They said, "Osh, you're going to be working on a railway line between Bristol and Portishead." So I guess the first lesson to learn here is to manage your expectations when you're going into work experience. You know, you can be working for some of the best companies in the world, but you can still be working on projects that aren't necessarily as inspiring. But I learned a huge amount from my experience at Arup. Did 6 weeks working on this bit of railway line. Successfully convinced myself that I wasn't cut out to be a civil engineer, and from there I pursued the aero stream. We'll come back to what I learned from this experience near the end, but that was my first bit of work experience. So as I said, I picked the aero stream, and in my 3rd year, I went and did a summer placement at DMVGL. So for those of you that don't know, DMVGL is a big consultancy. They are a merger of lots of different companies. But the most notable of which for the Bristol office is Garrett Hassan, who were, before they formed a part of this merger, they were the biggest consultancy in wind energy. So I went to work for DMVGL and realized that I'd found my calling. Renewable energy was where I wanted to be. I got to work on a variety of really cool projects. So in the top left there, First Korat Wind, which is the largest wind farm in Southeast Asia. So by the end of my placement, I was responsible for kind of the monthly reporting on the performance of that particular wind farm, which at first was great, and it was a great responsibility. And then one of the substations at that site caught on fire. And then the monthly reporting was a little bit less fun after that point. It was a lot of phone calls with Thai engineers with quite broken English, basically telling me that there was a fire, and you know the conversation would be the same every week, that the fire was still there. But overall, it was a great experience. So I got to work on both wind and solar projects as a part of that 12 months. The sort of work that would be my sort of day-to-day was what are called pre-construction energy assessments. So in a very kind of simplified sort of way of explaining it, if you picture yourself as the client who owns a lovely patch of the North Sea, you'd call me up and you'd say, "Oh, look, Osh, I've got this lovely patch of the North Sea. It's located between these coordinates. Great view of the Scottish Hebrides. I'm thinking of putting a wind farm there. What can you do for me?" So I'd then go away. I take the coordinates of that particular site. I take the sort of budget that this particular client was talking about. We had a load of tools at DMVGL which would allow you to go away and process basically business cases for these wind farms. So we'd look within that particular size of farm, how many wind turbines we could get in there, how much we would space them based on the sort of the wind energy density that was available. What would be the best way to orientate those wind turbines based on the prevailing wind direction? Were there any obstructions, any islands onshore, any sort of forestry that might cause the wind speed or the wind kind of distribution to be disrupted. So we'd go away, we'd do all that work, and we'd come back and we'd say, this is how much you need to spend on the wind turbines. This is how much you'll produce from that wind farm every year. This is how many years your project will pay itself back from. So it was a really good experience, kind of to get an idea of the whole picture, really, all the things that feed into making these projects sort of commercially viable. And we did similar things for solar farms as well, but that was a little bit less exciting. There were a lot fewer factors that impacted that, so the work was a fair bit simpler, but still really good stuff. The other things that I learned from DMVGL, and I didn't necessarily learn it at the time, was I'd really found the right sector for me, but I hadn't necessarily found the right job for me. And it wasn't until I had, my graduate role now that I had that realization. So I think that's something to bear in mind when you're getting these experiences, is you can kind of be overwhelmed, I guess, as I was, that you found the right sector for you. Because I've been indecisive, always been a very indecisive person. So I was never really particularly sure what sector I was going to go into. But as soon as I landed on renewable energy, I knew. But actually, the work that I was doing for DMVGL was quite repetitive near the end of my placement. So, and I realized from working in other companies since that actually working in a big company like DMVGL didn't suit me as much. And that brings us on to my next experience, really. So in my fourth year, I did a summer placement at a little company in Bristol called Belltown Power, who are asset managers for a number of assets across the country. So it's similar sort of work, really, where your customer is the owner of some wind turbines, some solar farms, and in Belltown Power's case, some micro hydro projects as well. And the sort of work that we'd be doing there would be, again, reporting on a monthly basis how these assets were performing against what we predicted, and looking at ways that we could improve the performance. So, for instance, there was one farm that we had in the very north of Scotland that suffered from really serious icing issues. So something that we were doing as a team was working out how we could retrofit some tech onto these wind turbines to prevent that from being such a problem. And again, it was kind of similar sort of experience in terms of the work that I was doing, but it was a wholly different experience in terms of the team. This was a company of kind of less than 30 people, whereas DMVGL had been, if you're counting all their offices all over the globe, it's kind of thousands of people. So, and actually, in the 6 weeks that I spent working at Belltown Power, probably made much better friends than I did in the 12 months that I worked at DMVGL, just because we were working in a close proximity, we were a close-knit team, we do a lot more fun things as a group. So there's a lot of benefits to being in a smaller company. But I'll touch on that again at the end, because I've got some kind of summary slides on that. One of the great experiences that I had with Belltown Power was that we actually got to climb this wind turbine on the right. It's about a 60-meter hub height, and when you're at the top of these things, you don't really realize from the ground how much that nacelle at the top of the turbine is moving. So the wind turbine was still operating when we went up. So the wind turbine is turning, and you've got that kind of the gyroscopic effect of the rotating blades, and you're sat on the top. It's really quite nerve-wracking, but it was cool. We had our lunch sat on the top up here, and that was a really cool experience. So then in fifth year, I engaged much more with Engineers Without Borders, and really got involved with the outreach side of stuff that EWB do. I know that we've got some people on the call today from EWB, and I would really strongly recommend getting involved with the outreach stuff. It's really, really rewarding. It's a fair bit of hard work preparing for it. I was kind of the outreach officer with, there were two of us that were the outreach officers, so we organized the whole thing, and it was a lot of hard work, but it's really, really rewarding. If you know, having conversations with your peers can bring you down when you think about, you know, how depressing it is that climate change is looming and, you know, we're all doomed and all this sort of thing. All you need to do is get yourself into a classroom and start quizzing children this age on how much they know about climate change and how much they know about the solutions, and it just gives you an incredible hope for the future. You know, the education system is doing a fantastic job of educating the next generation on the challenges that we're facing, and I'm more than convinced that we'll be very well equipped to take on all these challenges with some of the things that I learned from going into these classrooms. Luckily, this has been something that I've been able to continue with my job. Obviously, this year it's all had to be virtual, but it was one of the things I kind of stated in my job interview, was that I was really keen to continue with this sort of work. And again, we'll get into it, but the company I'm working for now is very small. You know, we're a team of 30 people. It's a startup. Again, you've got a lot more flexibility with a company that sort of size to make those sorts of demands, if you like, in your job interview. So that was 5th year. That brings us to graduation from engineering design. I didn't realize that Paul was going to be on the call with us today, but I think he deserves a special mention for all the hard work he does for engineering design. He's a tirelessly hardworking man, and he deserves a hell of a lot of credit for that. So I guess the message here is appreciate Paul while you're there, because I don't think there are many course directors like him with his sort of commitment. And so that brings us on to my current job at Bombora Wave Power. So, as I mentioned, Bombora is a startup that was founded in Western Australia by a set of brothers out in Western Australia. It's a device that extracts energy from waves. These pictures probably don't make it very clear how that works at the moment, but I've got a few slides to show how it actually works. But I think this has been kind of a fantastic experience for me. Really, it's combined, you know, my passion for renewable energy with working for a smaller company, which I think has a huge amount of advantages that suited me anyway. Wouldn't necessarily suit everybody. And on top of that, there's something really cool about being on the forefront of a new technology. Something that really struck me when I was working at DMVGL was there were a lot of people that had worked there for 10, 15, 20 years. And they were constantly banging on about, you know, 10, 15 years ago, when they were on the forefront, when they were pioneers in wind energy, and how, you know, over the series of mergers that DMVGL had gone through, how they'd kind of lost that sense of pioneering. So that really struck me when I was working there. And it wasn't until I got into a job where I kind of embraced that same feeling that I really understood where they were coming from. So wave energy, I think, is really on the brink of making it into our energy mix and playing a real role in combating the climate crisis, and being kind of at the front face of that movement, if you like, is really inspiring. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. So maybe I'll come back to these pictures later to explain them. But so we're working on a couple of projects with Bombora at the moment. The first is a demonstration project to kind of validate our technology. We've done a load of scale testing going back years. So 2015, I think we did a 1 to 20 scale. Then we did a 1 to 10 scale. Then we did a 1 to 3 scale. Now, this summer, we're going in the water doing a full scale prototype, which will be a 1.5 megawatt capacity. and it's going just off the coast of Pembrokeshire, which is near to where our office is. So I've been involved in this project, and for the next 3 months, I'm actually going to be down working on the assembly site, getting my hands dirty, which is going to be a bit of a change for me. I've always had cushy jobs in offices up until now, so I think that's going to be a really good experience. So that's the project we're working on here, and then concurrently we're working on a project for what will be the next device after this, and we're working on kind of a floating wind and wave hybrid project. So I'm sure if you're interested in renewable energy, you will have already picked up on the big buzz around floating wind at the moment in the industry. So we're trying to kind of piggyback onto that and look at the opportunities there are to increase the energy production of a floating wind platform by integrating wave energy converters into that platform. And that's where the majority of my time has been spent, actually working on that particular project. So I'm going to show you this video now. This is kind of shows how the Bombora technology works. I'm going to talk a little bit about Bombora specifically, but then, you know, to finish off, I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly about wave energy, because clearly there are lots of different technologies that are being pursued at the moment, and ours isn't the only one that has potential of, you know, breaking through. Hopefully the sound will come through, but if it doesn't, I can just yeah, talk over it. Let's see, here we go.
Osh, I don't think we've got sound, so if you want to narrate, that'll be amazing.
Okay. Okay. There is a way to do that, isn't there? Probably best that I don't try and mess with that now. Okay, so yeah, effectively, as waves pass over the device, where the wave is at its peak, there is a particular hydrostatic pressure being observed by the device on the seabed, and where the wave is at its trough, there's a different hydrostatic pressure being felt by the device, and it's harnessing that difference in pressure that our device does to extract energy. So the rubber membranes that you can see there that are inflating and deflating, they effectively push air through the system, which then goes through kind of a duct network and turns a turbine. And you know, the key benefits that we see from our device is what you're seeing now is that it's quite modular, so you can quite easily tune how big or small you want the device to be. Maintenance is quite easy because all you need to do is remove one of those sound modules and take it back to shore, do your maintenance and bring it back. And we're placed at the seabed so that we are more survivable. So clearly from waves, there's a huge force being imparted on the platform. So being sat on the seabed out of the way means that when those big storms come along, we're in a good position to survive those wave loads. So as you can see, I think this might have been in the blurb for this talk. You put in wave energy into YouTube and you're bound to get a video of somebody surfing. So yeah. Maybe if that wasn't clear, you can ask questions afterwards about how that technology works. I'm not sure I've done a particularly good job of explaining it, but yeah, so that's Bombora's technology. So going on to the wave energy more generally, some of the advantages that I perceive from this. First of all, 50% of the world's population lives within 200 kilometers of the coast. So clearly, having your renewable energy generation near the point of consumption is valuable. So whether that's offshore wind, offshore floating wind, wave energy, tidal energy, using the sea and the resources that has is, that's going to be the future. We're going to be moving more and more towards production that is happening at sea. So the other thing about wave energy is that there's coastlines all over the world, and wave energy, kind of unlike tidal energy, which is quite concentrated in narrow gullies, if you like, between islands. Wave energy is quite well distributed. So yeah, I've got a plot on the next slide which shows how it's distributed, but we in the UK are particularly well placed to harness wave energy. I think actually the UK and Ireland receive something like 10% of the world's wave energy, something mad like that. So we're in an incredibly good position to harness that resource. This will be something that you'll see banded about for technologies that are not wind or solar, is that we can get energy from the waves 24 hours a day. So clearly, if we wanted an electrical grid that was entirely decarbonized, and we wanted it to rely purely on wind and solar, we'd need lots of storage and lots of overcapacity to meet those demands. Whereas if you've got something like wave to support that grid, then you've got what we call like a base load. So you've got something that you can rely on to be producing 24 hours a day, on which you build your wind, your solar, your storage. So that's another big advantage. This one I kind of dispute a little bit, because when I was at DNVGL, we had incredible tools for predicting how much wind energy and how much solar energy we were going to get from our wind and solar farms. But if we're talking more long term than, like a week in advance, you can predict wave energy similar to the way that you can predict tidal energy. So it's kind of more like months in advance. So you can get a longer term prediction. Waves correlate quite well with our energy demand. So clearly in the UK, we use more energy in winter, and the wave resource is larger in winter. So there's quite a good correlation there, whereas that correlation is not as good for solar, where your peak production is in the summer, but your peak demand is in the winter. I think I've already touched on that one. So clearly, if we're going to look for a grid that's a net zero grid, we need to have a diverse renewable energy mix. It was around Christmas time that there was a complete anomaly in the weather where there was almost no wind for a few days. Just against all predictions, there was just no wind. So you need to be robust to things like that, to events like that. You need to have a diverse mix of options that you can produce renewable energy from. And on top of that, you need storage, which is another challenge altogether. And this is one that I'm particularly passionate about. So for the M-Wave device, obviously we sit under the sea, so there's no visual pollution, and we don't have any perceived impacts on the environment. So that's something that we put a lot of focus into. Is in Pembrokeshire, we're in an area of natural beauty. The water around Pembrokeshire is actually a marine protected area. So not any old technology could get the license to put a demonstrator in the water. So we've had to do a lot of work to prove that our technology has no impact on marine mammals and any other marine life, but we've been able to successfully prove that. So that's a particularly good advantage of wave energy. A couple of other things. So as it stands, we need a base load, as I said, for the grid. So something that we can rely on to produce 100% of the time. And the government's current policy is for that to be produced by nuclear. But clearly there are risks and challenges associated with that. And on top of that, it's very expensive. So there's questions in themselves around how environmentally friendly nuclear power is. I'm kind of torn about it. As a short-term solution, it is a very good way of decarbonising, just because of the sheer mass of energy you can get from it, and it's lower carbon than fossil fuels, but still, you know, you're creating tons of radioactive waste, and you know, long term, I think we can do much better, and I think in the long term we can make wave energy cheaper and perform the same role that nuclear plays in the grid. So that's just a potential opportunity for the future. And then the final one is that for marine energy, for wave and tidal energy, this is common for both. There's a really sound UK-based supply chain. For the wind energy sector in the 1980s, there was a period where we were making all our own wind turbines. We were making everything in the UK, but a lot of that supply chain was then lost to other countries, and we're at that kind of critical point now with wave and tidal energy, where we've built up this really good supply chain in our own backyard, and you know, we can build these devices with UK made steel and all other kind of components like that, and it can be a real export value to the UK. You know, we're a net importer, so having technology that's high value that we can export is always going to be good for the UK economy. So, as promised, this is the kind of the global opportunity. So this is how wave energy is distributed across the globe. So you can see, as I was saying, in the UK and Ireland, there's a really distinct opportunity. There's a good concentration of wave energy there. Unfortunately, this big patch here between Antarctica and Australia is not near many human settlements, so that's not as valuable. But clearly, on the southwest coast of Australia, there's a great opportunity there, and that's actually an area of the world that we're very interested in at the moment, as well as Japan. You can see in the top right of the screen there as well. So just coming up to the last few slides now, these are just some of the future opportunities I see for wave energy and for marine energy in general. So one that we're currently pursuing, you can see in the bottom left there, is the project that I've been working on for the majority of my time here at Bombora, is the integration of wave energy on floating offshore wind platforms. So with minimal sort of changes to the platform, we can boost the energy production on those platforms by kind of up to what we think 50%. So that's a massive opportunity. Clearly, there's clearly a lot of work that still needs to be done there. We're hoping to put a prototype in the water, which is the one you can see on the bottom left there. Around 2023 is when we think we can get that in the water. Clearly a lot of challenges, but there's a huge opportunity there as well. Hydrogen production. This middle picture here is some fantastic work that's going on in the Orkney Islands, where they've basically got a kind of a circular economy built around hydrogen there at the moment, where all the ships going to and from the mainland are powered by hydrogen. There are local distilleries that are powered by hydrogen. There's research on the island into aviation powered by hydrogen. The local kind of gas central heating network is being supplemented by hydrogen, and that's all from excess renewables that are being produced on the island. So from wind turbines and the tidal turbines that they have at Orkney, they're able to produce so much more power than Orkney needs purely for electricity. And what they're doing is, with all that excess power, they're generating hydrogen, and that's supplementing all these other areas outside of electricity. And that for me is really exciting. I think that's going to be a real growth area in the future. And then finally, integration of marine energy with subsea data centers. So as we you know, the computational power that we all demand is increasing, the number of data centers and crucially the amount of land that they need to take up and the electricity that they need to consume is becoming gigantic. There's huge sweeps of Siberia and other cold places on the planet that are just covered in servers. which is an awful use of that land. You know, they're not pretty to look at. But some tests that Microsoft have done recently, and this actually happened to be in Orkney as well, is to have these data centers subsea, and you can quite neatly see how that would link into marine energy. So because they're at the bottom of the ocean, they were able to find that the servers performed much more reliably. So there were much fewer breakdowns of servers subsea because they were able to keep them cooler more effectively. So the problems that result from these servers generally comes from them overheating. So if you can keep them all underwater, and if you could power them with marine energy that's located nearby, so if that's a wave energy converter, if that's tidal energy, if that's floating offshore wind, then that's even better, because that's going to be a real area where there's going to be increased pressure on these data centers to decarbonize, because they're huge and increasing users of electricity and energy. So that's another big opportunities I see for kind of marine energy and wave energy. So you'll be glad to hear that I'm on my final slide now. You'll get to stop hearing me rambling on. Just a few kind of conclusions, mainly related to kind of what I've learned from kind of job experience that I've had and how I've ended up at Wave Energy. So summer placements are actually, when I first joined engineering design and found out that we were doing summer placements, I was quite reluctant about it, because I quite liked at that time spending my summer at home, catching up with friends from school. I was worried about missing out on that. But actually, the summer placements have served really well in sort of narrowing the field of where you're looking as a graduate for the kind of job that you're after. So you very quickly learn from work experience what it is that you like and what it is that you don't like about the job that you're working in. And building up that information through a series of summer placements really helps you pick a graduate job that you're going to love. And it certainly worked out that way for me. And yeah, so even if the summer placement is a bit of a train wreck, that bad experience is just as valuable in the long run, because you would have learned, okay, I don't necessarily want to work on railways for the rest of my life, or you know, I don't want to work for a big company, or you know, you might find that working for a big company does really suit you. And this is so the next point then, and this is something I touched on. So you can be in the right sector, and you can be very confident that you've picked the sector that you're passionate about, but you should constantly challenge yourself as to whether the job within that sector is the right one for you. So looking back on it now, I think my job at DMVGL, as much as I've gained from that, I'm in a much better place now. I'm in a much happier place in a smaller, more kind of dynamic team than I was there. Big organizations and small organizations have their relative merits. So while you're kind of going out and getting experience, I would recommend getting the experience of both and making a conscious decision to apply for companies that are different sizes, because I think they're very different experiences, even if they're within the same sector. And big organizations suit some people down to the ground. You know, it's a big name to have on your CV. Having the DMVGL's name on my CV certainly helped me get through the door with a lot of the jobs, you know, the jobs I've had since then, and that's really valuable. And there's a lot of kind of there's a lot of benefits to working for a big organization, and I think I've talked a lot about the benefits of working for a small organization. So you just need to find what works for you, basically. Kind of a general point here, most of you who've tuned in are probably interested in renewable energy. I think that's kind of a prerequisite for turning up for this talk, but it is a hugely rewarding sector to work in, and there are massive opportunities for the sector to grow in the future. And I would highly recommend it to anybody. You know, we're tackling the biggest challenge that we'll ever face, you know, that humankind has ever faced, right? And there's nothing more motivating than that when you come home from work at the end of the day. And yeah, picking up on what I said before about being on the forefront of a new field as well. Since joining Bombora, I've realized what I was missing at DMVGL. You know, being at the forefront of revolution, if you like, in how we produce renewable energy is really motivating. And there's a kind of a do or die attitude in the company where, you know, in 6 months' time, we could either be bust, like lots of wave energy companies have gone, or we could have completely changed the sector and completely changed the view that the world has on renewable energy and marine renewable energy in particular. So with that, I'm going to stop babbling on and open the floor to any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Osh. Yeah, some really good points there, especially at the end about, you know, some career advice, and then some really interesting content as well. I think you've persuaded a lot of people to go into renewable energy. So let's kick off with this question, because I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same. So Ian's asking, if someone wanted to apply to Bombora, who'd be the best person to contact?
Yeah, good question. And probably worth saying now, actually, we're on a bit of a recruitment drive. So it's a good time to be putting your name in the hat. You're more than welcome to come to me for questions about the company or any sort of advice for applying. I applied with a kind of a speculative application. There wasn't a job role that I applied to initially, and I just did a kind of a 6-week placement as a sort of a trial, and from there I was taken on as a full-time employee. Yeah, so I guess probably get in touch with me as a starting point if you've got any questions, and I can probably direct you to the right people from there, I guess.
Amazing. So we've had quite a few questions about sort of summer placements and things, and one of them from Lewis is about how much of your degree experience so far did you use in your placement, or was it quite a steep learning curve? I think that's specifically like your first placement, but I suppose it applies to all of them.
Yeah. So I guess it is a bit of a step into the deep end with the summer placements. Like, I remember turning up at Arup and thinking, like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't know anything. Like, why have they taken me on, right? But everybody has to start somewhere, and I think actually getting that experience while you're still a student is really valuable, and it's something that I definitely didn't appreciate at the time, and didn't appreciate going into it at all, how much that would hold me in good stead. You know, you'll be surprised how much transferable skills that you have from university that will be used during a summer placement. But it is a really steep learning curve. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say there, but it's yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think just to get some of these summer placement questions, to group them together, there's a few questions asking how you found your first year placement, and others about sort of what was the day-to-day job like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I kind of touched on in the presentation, I think I was quite reluctant to take a summer placement at the beginning, because I was quite keen to go home, and summers were quite significant for me at home. You know, I'd catch up with a lot of old friends. So I actually went for the kind of shortest summer placement that you could possibly get. I had a 6-week placement with Arup. But Bristol, for a start, if you're going to do a summer placement in Bristol, as a student, you really don't appreciate how much Bristol comes alive in the summer. So that was it was amazing being in Bristol over the summer. Hopefully, by the time we get to this next summer, it'll be back to its normal buzzing self. And then, and the other question was to do with like day-to-day stuff, wasn't it? Yeah. So it's going back quite a long time now, but the sort of work that I was doing for Arup was, you know, this will be specific to any placement you do, but it wasn't particularly technical. And I think you can expect that from your first summer placement. They won't give you something hugely exciting to do. Even Alex and Charlie, who are working on, you know, on the face of it, much more exciting projects than me, were doing equally menial tasks to begin with. But again, having that sort of experience on your CV is really valuable, and you learn a huge amount. I just remember from that summer, I went in being able to kind of multiply, add, and take away in Excel. And by the time I was finished, I could do all sorts of mad things with Excel. And that actually was a skill, you know, that I hadn't picked up in uni, hadn't really picked up in school, that was hugely important to all my jobs since then. Just those sorts of skills, you know, you can pick up from a summer placement. But I think in the wider context, you know, skills aside, what I got most out of it was finding out what it was about a job that I really valued. I think I touched on that a little bit, but you know, from that Arup experience, I knew straight away that, you know, if I was unsure about which engineering stream I was going to go down, I think by the time I'd finished that placement, I'd ruled out the civil stream. And you know, I think at the time I thought that was you know, a bad thing, that I'd gone into something that I didn't necessarily enjoy. But in the you know, in the fullness of time, you realize that actually those experiences that aren't perfect are actually the ones that you learn the most from when you're applying to your next job and looking for what is it about this next company that you're applying for that really appeals to you. Yeah, so just from that perspective, I think that was probably the biggest thing that I got from those summer placement experiences.
Yeah, some really, really interesting points there. So taking it more towards renewable energy again, Raymond's asking, what's the difference between wave and tidal energy?
Yeah, really good question. It's one that I'm constantly having to explain to friends and family, because the minute you say that you're working on wave energy in Wales, they think that you're working on the tidal lagoon in Swansea, which is a very different technology. So wave energy relies on extracting the energy from basically the circular motion of particles at the sea surface. So it's that, and for our particular device, it's the difference in height between two different points in the wave that creates. So it's that pressure difference between the difference in height of two different parts of the wave that drives the air around our system. That's wave energy. Tidal energy you can split into two different types, so tidal range and tidal stream. Tidal stream is basically like a wind turbine underwater, but your medium is now water as opposed to air. So you end up with a much smaller turbine because your seawater is kind of 800 to 1,000 times more dense than your air. And so that's tidal stream. You extract it in the same way that a wind turbine extracts energy from the wind. And what you rely upon for that is fast moving flows in kind of gullies between islands. And that's typically where they're located. So for instance, a notable one is the Maygen project in Orkney, which is probably one of the most successful tidal projects there is at the moment. And then tidal range uses extracts energy sort of like a hydroelectric dam does. So it takes advantage of the fact that you have a big range in tidal height of the water, and you create a blockage to that water and extract energy the same way that a dam does, by using the difference in gravitational potential energy to force water through a turbine. So yeah, wave energy is quite difficult to conceptualize, but if you think about it as you've got circular moving particles at the sea surface, and it's extracting the energy that they're creating, that's the easiest way to think of it, I think.
Yeah, and I guess it would be remiss not to mention that if anyone listening is really interested in this kind of thing, then Paul actually runs a unit called Engineering Design for Wind and Marine Power, where you can learn all about marine energy and wind energy in a lot more detail.
Thanks very much for the plug, Rosie. I appreciate that. So yeah, if you can pick wind and marine power in your 4th year, and hopefully by the time you guys reach your 4th or 5th year, you'll all have access to a solar energy module, which is, as I mentioned previously, Osh helped to develop just before leaving university. So yeah, I'll add to that plug, Rosie, but thanks a lot.
So yeah, we've got loads of questions still, so we'll try and get through as many of these as possible, but it might be that we can maybe pass on a contact email, Osh, if we don't manage to answer all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Kim's question kind of links to what we've just been talking about, and she's saying that she's read that the vast majority of energy in waves is at the region close to the surface. So doesn't placing the device at the seabed mean most of this energy is lost, even if it is better protected?
Yeah, really good question. Really comes to the heart of one of the biggest challenges in wave energy. So yeah, there's I think is it something like 80% of wave energy is present within the top quarter of a wavelength from the surface. So it's certainly the energy density is much higher at the surface. Your trade-off is this: so the nearer the surface you are, the more energy you can produce. And there are some, technology developers for wave energy that have gone with, right, we're going to be right near the surface. That's what we're going to do because that's where the most energy is. The trade-off that you face is by being at the surface, you for all your regular waves, all your kind of like little waves that are going along quite happily, you're performing very efficiently, and that's fantastic. But the minute you reach a storm and you reach kind of giant waves, and the sort of offshore locations that we're talking about now, the waves can get up to like 10 meters in height. Like, you just can't picture how big these waves are. The minute you've got something that's near the surface in those sorts of conditions, it's going to get absolutely battered. So you either you do one of two things. You move further down towards the seabed, which is the route that we've taken, or you end up with a much bulkier, over-engineered device at the surface, which both drives up your cost, but also in some cases will drive down your efficiency as well. So whereas previously you were going to the surface because you could be most efficient there, actually once you realize that you're at the surface and you need to build something that's going to survive this massive storm, you end up building something much bulkier and less efficient anyway. So the way we see it, you have to take that penalty on efficiency whichever way you go. But by being at the sea surface, you're safer, and the device can be there longer. Wind turbines are typically in operation for kind of 25 years, and even at the 25-year stage, at DMVGL we did a lot of life extension projects where we did a kind of an assessment of the health of the turbine. So actually, one of the pictures that I showed on that slide was blade inspections that I did. So we'd go to site, we'd look at the condition of the blades. Somebody would also go up the tower, look at the condition of the gearbox, all that stuff. Is this turbine fit to continue in operation beyond 25 years? So from a wave energy perspective, that's what you're competing against. You're competing against something that can last for 25, 30 years. If you're putting something at the surface, which, yeah, it produces loads when it's there to begin with, but it only lasts 5 years, then your LCOE, oh God, what happened there? your levelized cost of energy, which is the metric that we're always judged against, is always going to be poorer. So it's always all a trade-off, but it's a really good question, and it is if we could make something that operated at the surface that was survivable in storm conditions, you're onto a winner. So it's the right question to be asking.
Brilliant. And I guess another trade-off that exists there is there's a couple of questions about how the technology impacts the ecosystems and the marine life in the water. Yeah,
so this is something it's one of the reasons that I was really attracted to wave energy. So I think that we have the most environmentally inert technology that there is out there. So, and when I say environmentally inert, I mean we have the least impact on the marine life around us. You know, that there's, so as I said, because we're deploying the device in Pembrokeshire, and Pembrokeshire is a national park effectively, you know, you can't, there's huge restrictions on the sort of infrastructure that you can build in Pembrokeshire because it's an area of natural beauty. And for instance, if you wanted to create offshore wind turbines, there would be huge resistance to that, because if they were within sight, that is, because of the kind of the visual impact that they would have on what's perceived to be, you know, a gorgeous coastline or whatever. Personally, actually, I don't have any problem with offshore wind turbines. I think it symbolizes the future and I think they're gorgeous, but that's just me. Not everybody shares the same view as I do. So being underwater and out of the way, and, you know, having no impact on marine life like seals and what have you, you know, all we've got is bits of rubber that are kind of flapping around a little bit. So it's not like a big rotating turbine that, you know, a seal or whatever could get like caught up in or whatever. So it's very inert in that sense. It just kind of sits there. And actually, we think, and we haven't got anything to prove this yet, but we think that it might actually promote marine life in the region of these things, because of the sort of marine biology that will cling to the device. It'll create its own like little reef, basically. Now, I've got nothing to substantiate that claim, but that's just something that we suspect might happen. So that's something that we are going to monitor during the demonstration project, is the marine life in the region of the thing. We're going to be measuring like the acoustics of it, because clearly, you know, lots of marine mammals communicate using sonar and, you know, that sort of thing. So we're pretty sure that it's not going to be very loud, because, as I said, it's just rubber moving back and forth. It's not like a turbine that's, you know, the turbine that's turning is encapsulated within the device itself. So yeah, that's a bit of a waffly answer, but yeah, that's where we're at with that particular conundrum.
Yeah, brilliant. I think we'll leave that as the last question. Yeah, so sorry that we didn't manage to get through everyone's, but hopefully if anyone has any burning questions still, they can pass them on and we can get them to Osh. And Essie, would you like to announce the voucher winners, and then we can wrap up?
Yep, so the raffle winner today was Dave Choi, so congratulations. And the best question, I know we didn't get through all of them, but from today's, I think we're going to choose Kim's with the question. Great, so thank you. I will send you those vouchers soon. Thanks for everyone for attending.
Yeah, brilliant. So congrats to those guys. I've just put my email in the chat box and I'll think of a way to pass on any remaining questions to Osh. Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Osh. It's been a brilliant talk and we've had a fantastic turnout. I think some people actually couldn't get in because we have a limit on how many people we can get in, but we're going to make the recording available to others. Yeah, and thanks, Paul, as always, for your time.
Thanks, Rosie. Just to very quickly say thanks, Osh, for the mention. What he didn't say was that after 5 years, he was completely desperate to escape from me. And as much as I tried to keep him here, he was desperate to leave. So I think that's the harsh reality of the situation. Great to see how well you've done, and it was a really inspiring talk. Thanks, Osh.